This is Jack's Nightmares broadcasting from a safe place. If you can hear me, you're one of the last. What you're about to hear is the story of a survivor, or at least someone who tried to be. Subscribe and comment if you're still out there. And now, let's begin. I still remember how the day began. My alarm beeped at the usual time, and I prepared for another routine Monday. Lesson plans, grading, faculty meetings. Nothing seemed unusual at first. I arrived at Westwood High with a cup of coffee and a stack of ungraded papers. The hallways were buzzing with sleepy teenagers complaining about homework, discussing weekend escapades, and exchanging groggy hellos. If I had known what was coming, I would have told every student I saw to run. Before first bell, I stopped by the teacher's lounge. Mr. Kim, the math teacher, was already there. He was oddly pale, leaning against the counter, breathing through clenched teeth. I asked if he was okay. He just waved me off. I figured it was a cold or maybe a stomach bug, and I didn't pry. We all push ourselves through mild illnesses sometimes. As soon as the bell rang, I rushed to my classroom. My students filed in, many yawning. Adam, one of the quiet ones, slipped in last. He wore a hood and seemed to be limping. I asked if he needed to see the nurse, but he mumbled something and lowered his head onto his desk. Another teacher's voice echoed in the hallway, raised in a sharp cry, so sudden it made me freeze. It wasn't the typical get-to-class admonition. It sounded like someone calling for help. I told my class to stay put. My intention was to pop out, see what was happening, and return quickly. The moment I stepped into the corridor, I noticed an unsettling shift in the atmosphere. Several doors were ajar. Lockers were swung open, with a few backpacks on the ground. Rounding the corner, I spotted Mrs. Green, who taught English literature, kneeling beside someone who had collapsed. As I approached, I realized it was Mr. Kim. His complexion had worsened, and he showed no response when I called his name. Mrs. Green looked up at me with worry. She said he'd been complaining of dizziness, then suddenly he dropped. It was too early to guess what was wrong, so we decided to get the nurse's help. The second bell chimed, signaling class was in session, but the hall didn't empty. Several students lingered, peeking around corners. I told them to get inside classrooms and lock the doors. Something about Mr. Kim's condition rattled me more than I wanted to admit. I dashed to the nurse's office, but found it dark and empty. A small sticky note reading, "Be right back," was stuck to the door. Frustrated, I hurried back to find Mrs. Green had propped Mr. Kim against the wall. He was twitching, eyes flickering with a dazed focus, like he was fighting something inside his mind. Then we heard it. A scream from somewhere down the hallway. Not a shout or a yell, but a scream full of panic. Mrs. Green and I exchanged glances. She stayed with Mr. Kim, while I jogged toward the source of the noise. That's when the overhead speaker crackled with a frantic voice. Our principal, Dr. Reeves. He announced an immediate lockdown, instructing everyone to remain in classrooms. This never happened unless there was a genuine threat. I ran back to my classroom at full speed. From the small door window, I saw my students pressed against the glass, desperate for answers. I slipped in and told them something serious was happening, that we had to stay put. One of them turned on a local news live stream on their phone. The headlines scrolled across the screen with phrases like "unexplained attacks" and "unusual illness spreading." Reports described individuals biting others, a surge in violent behavior in multiple parts of town. The phone's volume was low, but the tension in the room rose with every word. Suddenly, heavy footsteps thundered past our door. I peered outside and witnessed two students sprinting, chased by someone moving with a wild desperation. The chase passed in seconds, but it confirmed the outbreak was not a mere rumor or local scuffle. It was happening inside our school. I made a quick decision. The lock on my classroom door wasn't robust, and we needed to find a safer spot. Most of the time, the cafeteria or gym would be a poor choice for security, but they both had more sturdy doors and multiple exits. As I weighed our options, Sam, a typically confident student in the back row, suggested the science wing. Each lab has an emergency door with reinforced locks. It made sense. We lined up, told everyone to stay close, and quietly slipped into the hallway. Even though the overhead lights remained on, an uneasy gloom had settled over the school. Students' backpacks, papers, and notebooks littered the floors, signs of abrupt disruption. A series of faint scratching noises came from several locked classrooms. I guessed some folks had barricaded themselves inside, hoping to stay hidden. We tiptoed toward the science labs. As we passed the library, a sound of commotion erupted behind its doors. It wasn't muffled conversation, it sounded more like furniture scraping. I paused, torn between investigating and continuing on. Just as I was about to move, the library doors burst open. A panicked student stumbled out, covered in shallow wounds. I couldn't see them clearly from my angle. He collapsed in front of me, eyes wide, trying to speak, but only managing disjointed gasps. Behind him, two individuals moved into view with unsteady gaits. Their faces were slack, eyes cloudy. They advanced, arms swiping in the air. My students huddled close. The library hallway offered no cover, so we backed away fast. I tried to pull the injured student toward us, but he seemed too weak to stand. The two figures loomed closer. They looked like staff members, but something had taken over. They reached out with an unnerving lack of hesitation. I remember stepping forward, raising a desk leg I'd grabbed from the hallway floor. I had to protect my group. One of them lunged. I swung on reflex. He staggered back but came forward again, arms flailing, trying to bite with a ferocity that made my stomach twist. Nearby, the second figure advanced toward the collapsed student, who managed a soft plea. Seeing no choice, I motioned for our group to move. We couldn't do anything else. The student on the ground was out of reach, pinned by the second figure. I led everyone around the corner. The sight behind us was horrifying, but we had to survive. We heard the muffled noises echo as we turned the corner, each step shaky. All my students had wide eyes, grappling with the reality that people they knew had transformed into threats. We rushed into the science wing. The first lab was unlocked and unoccupied, but we could see traces of a fight. Chairs overturned, glassware broken. We closed the door and engaged every lock. The thick door offered some relief. There was an emergency shower in the corner, a fume hood, and reinforced windows that overlooked a courtyard. We took a moment to gather supplies. Bunsen burner stands, metal rods, anything that could serve as a makeshift defensive tool. I found a first aid kit in the cabinet. As soon as we secured the door, a voice spoke from a supply closet. My heart lurched before I remembered I was trying not to freeze up. Carefully, I opened the closet door. Inside was Miss Russell, our school nurse, trembling in the dark. She explained she had come to the lab looking for emergency supplies when the power flickered. Hearing footsteps, she hid. It was a relief to have someone with medical training. She told us that she'd seen several individuals with unusual symptoms throughout the morning. Clammy skin, unfocused eyes, aggression. Some had strange bite marks. She tried helping them, but they deteriorated rapidly. Fear fell over us when she said, "They kept attacking anyone nearby." As if on cue, the lights flickered again. A few overhead bulbs popped, plunging the lab into partial darkness. We were left with only half the lights working, casting long shadows across the floor and lab tables. Everyone pressed in close, scanning the exits and windows. A single desperate pounding came from the hallway. Someone was outside trying to get in. Instinct told me it might be one of them, so I told everyone to remain quiet. The pounding stopped abruptly. In its wake, a faint scraping sound ran across the door. Then it faded into silence. We couldn't stay locked in the lab forever. Supplies were limited. We had no direct communication with the outside, except for a few student cell phones, and the signals were unreliable. One of my students, Jade, suggested we try the main office to use the landline. The problem, the main office was on the other side of the school. We decided to move as a group, using the back stairwell behind the labs. It led to the second floor, which connected to the media center, and from there, a short hallway to the main office. Our plan was to avoid open areas like the cafeteria or gym. Carefully, we unlatched the door and crept into the hallway. Every step seemed to echo. We spotted an unconscious figure slumped in front of a nearby locker. Unsure if it was a trick or if the person needed help, we approached slowly. I whispered that we should keep moving, but Miss Russell insisted on checking for signs of life. She knelt down, felt for a pulse. At that instant, the figure's eyes snapped open. Miss Russell jolted backward just in time. The individual rose, limbs stiff, and lunged with an unnerving determination. I pulled Miss Russell away while Sam and Jade swung their improvised rods to block. The figure staggered but kept moving. We scrambled to the stairwell. The door leading upstairs was open and a chilling echo of footsteps came from above. We hurried up, hoping we wouldn't collide with another group of infected. Halfway up, we heard an explosion of shouts from the first floor behind us. I caught a glimpse through the stairwell window of a group of students sprinting toward the exit. An infected figure blocked the doors, forcing them to retreat. It was chaos everywhere. Once we reached the second floor, we found a scattered scene of backpacks, scattered books and desks shoved into corners. The hallway was long and poorly lit. We started down it, every sense on alert. Distant crashes and muffled cries reverberated in the walls. Halfway down, we saw a door marked Media Center. It was locked from the inside. With no time to waste, I knocked. A small, fearful voice answered. I recognized it as Mr. Ortiz, the librarian. He opened the door a crack, recognized me, and let us in. Inside, we found a handful of students taking shelter behind overturned tables and bookcases. Mr. Ortiz was armed with a heavy textbook tied to a mop handle. He said he'd locked the doors as soon as he realized something terrible was happening, but a few infected people had tried to enter earlier. He pointed to a student in the corner with her leg wrapped in gauze, courtesy of the supply closet's meager stock. The student, Tammy, had a bite wound. Miss Russell rushed over and checked the dressing. Tammy was conscious, though obviously shaken. While Miss Russell checked for fever or further injuries, Mr. Ortiz explained how Tammy was attacked in the hallway, but managed to escape before worse damage occurred. That's when I realized we needed to address the possibility that bites spread whatever was causing this behavior. The news reports suggested it was some kind of contagion. Miss Russell and Mr. Ortiz exchanged worried looks. None of us knew exactly how long it would take for symptoms to manifest, or if it was guaranteed. Still, we couldn't abandon Tammy. We decided to keep her separated from the rest of the group in case her condition changed. Time pressed on. The original plan was to get to the main office for the landline. We now had extra people to consider. Jade suggested we gather a large enough group to push through any threats. Mr. Ortiz offered to join. The rest of his group, including Tammy, would stay locked in the media center until we returned with help or clearer instructions. We set out again. Me, Miss Russell, Sam, Jade, Mr. Ortiz, and 3 other students who volunteered. The rest remained behind barricaded doors, waiting for signs of rescue. Our journey through the second-floor hallway was quieter than before, but tension crackled in the air. Lights flickered, casting wavering shadows that made it easy to imagine movement at every turn. We reached the top of a stairwell that led down to the main foyer, near the administrative offices. As we peered over the railing, we saw a cluster of individuals below. Some were banging on locked doors, others wandering aimlessly. We recognized at least one was a security guard. Initially, we thought he might still be aware, but he walked with the same strange movements as the others. To get to the main office, we had to descend the stairs and cross that foyer. There wasn't a better route. The alternative was a loop around the entire building that would likely be crawling with infected. We decided to move carefully. I used a hand signal to indicate we should proceed silently. Step by step, we made our way down, trying to avoid drawing attention. One of the wandering figures spotted us midway down. It let out a raspy gasp and started toward the stairs. That alerted the rest. and soon the entire cluster took notice. We abandoned stealth and sprinted the final stretch. The group advanced rapidly. Their arms reached out with an alarming single-mindedness. Mr. Ortiz shoved a small table to slow them. We dashed through the foyer, Miss Russell leading the way. She swung the main office door open, and we piled in as Mr. Ortiz and I slammed it shut behind us. The throng outside pounded on the door, rattling the frame. I scanned the room for anything to secure the entrance. We heaved a filing cabinet against it, but the pounding continued. Splintering noises hinted the door might not hold. The main office was in disarray. Papers littered the floor, phones off the hook. Principal Reeves was nowhere in sight. The single landline phone sat on the front counter. I grabbed it, punched in 911, but the line was dead. I tried an outside line, but no dial tone. Jade's phone still had a faint signal, so I asked her to try calling the authorities. She placed multiple calls but got no answer or busy signals. We had no direct link to help. A sudden noise in the back office made us jump. We found Dr. Reeves crouched under a desk, trembling. He stared at us in a daze, then recognized our faces and staggered out. He explained that he'd locked himself in after witnessing staff members attacking each other. He tried calling the district and local authorities, but got only frantic dispatches. As he spoke, we heard the door behind us begin to crack under relentless pounding. We retreated deeper into the office. Dr. Reeves mentioned a potential path through a side exit that led to a small faculty parking lot. It was typically locked with a heavy steel door. If we could get outside, maybe we'd find help, or at least a safer place to regroup. He led us through the administrative corridor, where cubicles and offices lined the walls. Some chairs were knocked over, drawers half open. Strange red smears stained the carpet here and there, signs of earlier struggles. I tried not to dwell on them. We located the side exit, a sturdy metal door with an electronic lock. Dr. Reeves swiped his badge, but no beep followed. The lock's LED stayed red. The entire system must have been compromised by the power flickers. We searched for the emergency override, rummaging through supply closets and utility cabinets. Meanwhile, the door leading back to the foyer threatened to give way any moment. Miss Russell found a breaker box with a manual override switch. Throwing it might unlock the door, but also risk plunging the entire section of the building into darkness. We had little choice. She flipped the switch. Sparks flew in the panel, and half the hallway lights snapped off. The side exit lock beeped, then turned green. We rushed to push it open. Cool outdoor air flowed in. It felt like relief, but it also revealed a new layer of chaos outside. The parking lot was dotted with abandoned cars. Some had doors left open, headlights on. A distant alarm blared somewhere in the neighborhood. In the far corner of the lot, a group of infected individuals roamed between vehicles. The barrier between us and them was a chain-link fence with a locked gate. We quietly edged out of the doorway, propping the heavy metal door open for a moment while we checked the surroundings. Before we could plan our next move, the foyer door inside the building splintered. We could hear the infected swarm flooding into the main office area. Their footsteps and ragged noises echoed in the hall. A few seconds later, they spotted our open exit door and charged in our direction. We had to seal the door behind us or risk being overwhelmed. Mr. Ortiz and I threw our weight against the metal door. The infected began pushing from the other side, arms clawing at the gap. With a burst of strength, we got it shut. The lock engaged, though the door jolted as the group banged on it. We stepped back, relieved to have a barrier. That relief was brief. The infected outside had spotted us too. They started shuffling towards the fence. We huddled around Dr. Reeves for guidance. He admitted he had no immediate plan. The city was presumably in crisis. Our best bet was to get off campus, find authorities or medical personnel who might still be in control. We saw one staff car parked near the exit gate. The fence around the faculty lot was high, but only locked by a padlock on the gate. If we could find the key or break the lock, we might slip out to the street beyond. We moved as a unit to the staff car. The infected outside were about 30 yards away, stumbling between other vehicles. Time was short. Dr. Reeves fumbled for his set of keys, trying to find the one for the padlock. A few seconds later, we hurried to the gate. He inserted the key. The lock wouldn't turn. In frustration, he tried another, then another. Sweat beaded on his forehead. A distant shout made us turn. Across the lot, more infected figures emerged from a side alley that fed into the school grounds. They moved in a slow but determined approach, forming a line that blocked any easy route back to the building. We were surrounded, except for the locked gate. Dr. Reeves finally found the right key. The padlock clicked, the chain rattled free, and the gate swung open. The street beyond was eerily quiet. Our relief was interrupted by a screech of tires nearby. A car veered around the corner, nearly spinning out. It smashed into a row of trash bins, the driver inside either frantic or infected. We ducked behind a concrete barrier as the vehicle whipped past. It disappeared around the bend, leaving a wisp of smoke. We slipped through the gate, onto the street. The infected in the parking lot were closing the distance. Sam pushed the gate shut behind us, sliding the chain back through to stall them. We hurried down the sidewalk, trying to avoid the main roads. Distant sirens wailed in every direction. Overhead, black smoke rose from a point downtown. Minutes later, we turned down a side street that led toward an old community center. Along the way, we saw more signs of the outbreak. A vacant bus with windows smashed, storefronts with shattered glass, and sporadic figures lurching between vehicles or collapsed on sidewalks. We attempted to remain hidden. Our group, now a mix of teachers, students, and the principal, pressed on. We needed supplies and a safe place. The community center was a few blocks away. It had a gym, kitchens, and possibly some staff who hadn't fled. We passed through a narrow alley, stepping over debris. An infected individual lurched out from behind a dumpster. Mr. Ortiz reacted, using his makeshift tool to shove it aside. We got past but heard more movement nearby. Reaching the community center, we found the doors locked. The large windows revealed the interior lights were on. Dr. Reeves knocked, hoping someone inside would respond. After a tense moment, a muffled voice answered, "Go away." We called back, explaining we were teachers from the high school, seeking shelter. The voice hesitated, then a volunteer inside unlocked the door. He recognized Dr. Reeves from a fundraiser event. We rushed in, quickly securing the entrance behind us. Inside, the central lobby was occupied by a handful of people, mostly locals, who arrived in a panic when the outbreak began. The volunteer explained they'd locked the doors once rumors spread of violent incidents nearby. This place was spacious but not fortified. People were gathered in small groups, unsure how to proceed. Our arrival caused a stir, especially once we shared details about the school's collapse. Some folks were relieved to see a principal and teachers. They hoped we had some plan or answers, but we were just as lost. Meanwhile, Miss Russell offered to assist the injured. Several people had shallow wounds, though no one appeared close to turning aggressive. Still, the risk lingered in everyone's mind. We checked the building's perimeter and discovered the back exit led to a narrow lot blocked by a tall fence. The volunteer suggested stacking furniture to create rudimentary barricades. We all pitched in, moving tables, chairs, anything that could reinforce the entrances. Just as we finished, someone outside began hammering on the main doors. Through the glass, we saw a group of anxious survivors pleading to be let in. They didn't show immediate signs of infection, so we unbolted the door. The moment we did, one of them collapsed into the lobby. He'd been bitten. Miss Russell stepped in, but the sight of the wound made the entire room uneasy. Dr. Reeves turned to me, whispering that we couldn't risk an inside outbreak. We had to isolate the injured. A quiet debate broke out among the healthy about whether to turn people away or offer assistance. Some wanted to show mercy. Others insisted on maximum safety. Eventually, it was decided to treat the injured in a side room, away from the main group. We'd keep them under observation to ensure they didn't transition into the same mindless state we'd seen. Every minute felt critical. Some of the newly arrived survivors whispered that the local hospital was overrun. Police were urging citizens to stay indoors and avoid contact with the infected. Rumors spread of the military setting up barricades and quarantine zones. We tried to confirm anything on the internet, but cell service was spotty, and the news channels played only emergency alerts on repeat. That's when the power began to fluctuate again. Lights dimmed, flickered, and returned. We huddled together, scanning for anything that could go wrong next. Large shadows seemed to dance across the walls each time the lights blinked. Tension in the lobby grew. In the distance, a series of crashes echoed from the streets outside. We braced for impact, suspecting the infected might find us at any moment. Sure enough, the volunteer from the front desk came rushing back, voice trembling. He'd gone to check the perimeter cameras and saw a sizable group of infected figures converging on the community center from multiple sides. Word spread among the small crowd inside. Anxiety spiked. People were shouting questions. Where can we go? What do we do? Are we trapped? I suggested we split into 2 teams, one to barricade the rear entrance more securely, another to hold the lobby doors. We moved swiftly, piling tables against the front. Meanwhile, muffled thuds against the back door signaled the infected had arrived there. The volunteers holding the rear blocked it with metal cabinets and a vending machine. The building shook with each impact from outside. The lights flickered again, then went out completely. Darkness seized the halls. We heard frantic footsteps, the whimpering of children, and the scraping of furniture. Flashlights clicked on from a few phones. I called out, telling everyone to remain calm and hold position. The volunteer led some folks to check the circuit breaker. Moments later, a faint glow from emergency lights flickered on. Our field of vision expanded slightly, revealing the worried faces of everyone around us. Then a series of shattering noises came from the far side of the building. It sounded like glass windows giving way. One of the doors must have been compromised. I grabbed my metal rod. Dr. Reeves found a broken chair leg, and others armed themselves with whatever they could. We moved to intercept. In a narrow hallway off the main lobby, shards of glass glittered on the floor. Several infected crawled through a broken window pane. We formed a line and confronted them. They pushed forward with unstoppable persistence, ignoring their injuries. Sam and Jade helped hold them back, while Miss Russell guided non-fighters to safer rooms. Mr. Ortiz swung his improvised tool in wide arcs, forcing the infected to stumble. We managed to slow the advance, but more kept pouring in. Retreating was the only choice. We backed down the hallway, trying to regroup. The infected spread through the corridors like a living tide, forcing us to give ground again and again. Before we realized it, we were pinned between 2 groups. The only avenue left was a side stairwell leading up to the community center's 2nd floor, typically used for storage and small offices. We rushed upstairs, hustling everyone we could. The volunteer from the front desk was among the last to climb. As we reached the top, we heard someone calling from below. It was a mother and her child, left behind in the chaos. I sprinted back down a few steps, extending a hand. She grabbed on, and I pulled them up, just in time to avoid a cluster of infected swiping at our ankles. We barricaded the stairwell door on the 2nd floor with chairs and a heavy desk. It wouldn't hold indefinitely. The corridor up here was narrower, with only 2 rooms, a storage closet and a conference room that overlooked the gym below. We packed into the conference room, bolting the door. The only light came from a single window near the ceiling. Below, through interior windows, we could see the gym. Infected figures were prowling across the basketball court, stepping over scattered debris. It was a surreal sight, like a scene from a nightmare. Tension filled the conference room. Some folks whispered prayers. Others exchanged frightened glances. Dr. Reeves slumped against the wall, breathing in short bursts. Miss Russell checked on the mother and child, who were trembling from the close call. Jade and Sam hovered near the door, holding their makeshift weapons. Suddenly, the metal handle jiggled. The infected were attempting to get in. Our barricade rattled, the desk moving inch by inch as they pushed. We had nowhere else to go, The only idea was to check if there was roof access or an emergency ladder. Mr. Ortiz said he saw a hatch in the storage closet. Wasting no time, a small group rushed to the closet. Sure enough, a metal ladder led up to a hatch. I climbed first. Pushing the hatch open revealed a flat rooftop illuminated by the city's dull glow. Up here, the sounds of distant chaos were more evident. Sirens, car horns, the hum of helicopters circling overhead. We helped everyone up. The last person through pulled the hatch shut behind us. Now on the roof, we faced the harsh reality of being stuck. But at least the infected inside couldn't easily reach us. A few of us scouted the rooftop edges. On one side, a narrow fire escape led down to an alley. In the alley, we saw infected figures wandering between dumpsters and broken crates. The other sides of the building faced busy streets swarming with activity. Helicopters roared past occasionally but didn't stop. No official rescue team seemed to be focusing on this area. Though we were out of immediate danger, the entire city looked like it was in disarray. Flames flickered in the distance. Plumes of black smoke rose from multiple points. The glow of street lamps revealed silhouettes staggering through intersections. Vehicles were abandoned on the roads, some still with their headlights on. It was the first time since the day started that we paused to take in the scale of what had happened. We huddled in small groups, trying to figure out our next move. Dr. Reeves suggested waiting until dawn, hoping official rescue teams or the National Guard might sweep the area. Others argued we should keep moving, find an evacuation route. Yet the view from the roof implied the streets were no safer than the building we'd just escaped. Hours passed. The moon rose, casting shadows across the rooftops. A few infected must have found the building's external fire escape, because we heard rattling from below, but it never progressed past the third landing. Our group stayed vigilant, rotating lookout shifts. Fear consumed us every time a helicopter spotlight skimmed over the block, only to fade away. We realized that in all this chaos, no one was guaranteed help. Morning light finally crept across the horizon, revealing the battered city in full. Thick smoke drifted from a number of fires, and the roads were choked with abandoned cars. We decided to divide ourselves into two teams. One team, led by Dr. Reeves, would attempt to climb down the far side of the building and make for a rumored police barricade. The other team, which included me and Miss Russell, would try to find a safer indoor shelter near the outskirts. Jade and Sam chose to stick with me. We tore a piece of tarp from the rooftop greenhouse to craft a makeshift banner, writing a plea for help in large letters. We secured it to the rooftop's edge, hoping a passing chopper or plane might see. Then we said our farewells, splitting supplies. Dr. Reeves led his team down the fire escape, timing their descent to avoid nearby infected. Once they hit the ground, they made a dash down an alley, disappearing behind buildings. We stood on the roof, watching until they were gone. Then Miss Russell and I guided our group to the opposite side, where an old service ladder descended into a narrower street. The infected presence seemed lighter there. Carefully, we climbed down. Once on the pavement, we formed a tight cluster. Our journey through the city's outskirts began. Though the streets were strewn with debris and crawling with danger, we stayed alert, ducking behind cars and slipping through side roads. Every block revealed a new scene of chaos or quiet dread. In the span of just 12 hours, our entire world had flipped. School hallways had become battlegrounds. Classrooms, once places of learning, were now refuges or traps. People we knew, colleagues, students, had transformed into threats. Yet a small group of us managed to stick together. We didn't know if we'd find help or if society had already collapsed. All we could do was keep moving, keep searching for a place to regroup. When someone asks me what those first 12 hours were like, I struggle to find the words. It was a tidal wave of fear and a test of resolve that no lesson plan could ever prepare us for. But we made it, at least for now. The sun rose on a broken landscape, yet it also illuminated the faces of those who survived alongside me. And that's where my story, for the time being, ends. It doesn't end in triumph or total despair, but in a steady resolve to keep going. I have no idea what awaits around the next corner. The only thing I do know is that I have a handful of young lives looking to me for guidance. I used to stand at a blackboard and talk about literature and grammar. Now, I stand on cracked pavement, hoping to lead them somewhere safe. The worst may still be ahead of us, but we keep moving forward, step by uncertain step, driven by the faint hope that there's still something left to save. That's all for now. But don't mistake the end of the story for the end of the nightmare. If you're still listening, like, comment and subscribe. Keep the signal alive. And remember, in a world like this, the real horror begins when the voices go silent.